My interest in photography evolved over time. I was born and raised in Seattle. Growing up, my dad made 8mm home movies and some still pictures too. My mom was a painter. When I was still in high school, I joined the Navy. As soon as I graduated, I bought an 8mm camera and started taking pictures of the places we visited in Japan and Hong Kong and the Philippines and Guam and Hawaii. Did 2 6-month cruises. It was mainly a way of just kind of recording what I was seeing, document my experiences. Then when I got out of active duty, I got married actually the day I graduated college. That was June 8th, 1968. I'm happily still married, fortunately. Then I went back to the University of Washington and got a degree in education, teaching industrial arts in junior high school. Just after that, just shortly after I moved back to Seattle, took a mountaineering class through the University of Washington, one of their extension programs, and I really started enjoying the outdoor activities, climbing, hiking, skiing. And I remember my first experience using a single lens reflex camera. I went on a backpacking trip to the Enchantment Lakes by Leavenworth, which is just a pristine mountain wilderness area. Small lakes, glacier carved granite rock, just wonderful camp and roam and climb. Place to the friend that I was there, it was in October, which larch trees turn yellow. They're one of the few deciduous trees with needles. So when the larch trees are yellow and the blueberries leaves have turned red in the fall, it's just such an incredibly beautiful environment. Anyway, my friend loaned me one of his 35mm cameras. I shot my first roll of slide film. I think that was in 1971, as I recall. I was so happy with the results of that. Rich, vibrant colors, and the pictures were so much sharper than what you see in tiny 8mm movie frame that I decided to buy a Pentax Spotmatic, my first 35mm camera, and 3 lenses that had the screw-in type lenses. This was a long time ago. And so I started taking slides of my experiences again, mountain climbing and did in river rafting. So on all the trips I did a lot of trips with friends. I have 2 daughters. I was able to take them on a lot of the rafting trips. I continued photographing, and I remember actually the first really kind of formal training I had with photography was taking a photography workshop from Art Wolf. My oldest daughter, who now lives here in Bellingham, was either junior or senior in high school, so I think that was about 1989. And Art Wolf was kind of early on in his photography career. He had his photos displayed at the first REI store in downtown Seattle. I greatly admired his photographs, and of course I bought a bunch of his photo books. We did this weekend workshop, and there was 3 or 4 evening sessions, and it was just really inspiring to see what can be done with a camera and with creativity. So that just furthered my interest in photography. After that, I took more photography workshops. There's a lot of really good photographers based in the Northwest. Pat O'Hara, who lives in Port Angeles, was another inspiration in my earlier, more formative photography days. I remember going to a workshop with John Shaw in Port Angeles in the Olympic Peninsula. He showed a lot of macro photographs, close-ups of frogs and insects and flowers and just a whole variety of close-up subjects, and I found that really intriguing to see things in such a different level instead of just the grand vista, which I really enjoy, but then to get the intimate detail of a flower or an insect. And he was using Nikon cameras, and I was quite impressed with the quality of the work that he was able to do, so I decided to get a Nikon single lens reflex camera, macro lens, and of course other lenses as well. So then I started devoting more time to macro photography, and it just kind of continued to evolve. I retired in the year 2000 at the age of 57, which was kind of nice to be able to stop working. Actually, from the time I was an engineer, then I taught junior high school for 7 years, and then I built a house for our family. 2 young kids at the time, 2 and 4. So that was kind of a stretch. I think it must have been about 2003. My youngest daughter went to Art in the Park in Leavenworth and saw some of the photographers that had their photographs on display, and she encouraged me to start showing and selling some of my photographs, and told her that I would be interested in doing that, but I really didn't want to go to the whole effort of matting and framing the prints and going to art fairs. I encouraged her to do that, and that's what happened. She did that. And I would go to art fairs with her. I would make the prints for her, and then she would do the marketing end of it. And so that was a fun way of sharing my photographs with a broader audience. I remember going to the Seattle Bellevue Arts and Crafts Fair, seeing a photographer there who had a lot of photographs from Guatemala, and that was quite intriguing to both me and my daughter Amy. After that, I started thinking about going to Africa. I'd seen many pictures over the years and nature documentaries and about wildlife in Africa. So I suggested to Amy that we do a trip to Kenya and Tanzania, and she thought that sounded like a fun thing to do, so I started planning the trip. Actually, a good friend of hers' mother had gone to Kenya and Tanzania a couple of years before that. She lived on Bainbridge Island and worked through a company called Africa Safari Specialists. And I contacted them, started working out an itinerary to photograph wildlife, decided that Kenya and Tanzania would be the two countries to visit. So we put this 3-week trip together, and then in October of 2007, Amy and I flew from Seattle to London, and then London to Nairobi, and began our wildlife safari, and it was just an amazing trip. After 2 days of travel, our plane landed in Nairobi. Amy and I were met there by our guide, a wonderful fellow named Robert. He drove us to the north of Nairobi to Samburu National Reserve, a wildlife refuge, where we spent, I think, 2 nights there. Went on game drives, just driving around, looking for wildlife and photographing the animals and the scenery. As soon as we entered the reserve, the first wildlife sighting we saw was a leopard walking with a dead monkey in its mouth. Then after that, we just saw just amazing wildlife. We saw large groups of giraffes, elephants, zebra, impalas, oryx. Some of the Samburu people, which are a native group, came to the lodge that we were staying at, performed a dance for us, had an opportunity to photograph them. They were just really wonderful people, and I got some nice close-ups of them and their ornamentation, their beadwork and clothing. And so our next destination was Lake Nakuru, which I think is a national reserve, I believe, mainly set aside because of the huge flocks of flamingos and other bird life there, but there's also large number of mammals, rhinoceros, elephants, the African buffalo, quite a variety of wildlife there. The flamingos especially were just amazing. I don't know how big the flocks were, but they were in the tens of thousands. They were really large flocks. We had a wonderful lodge that we stayed at, great staff, excellent food. We did game drives, mostly in the mornings, mid to late afternoon. I think by dark we needed to be back to the lodge. For safety reasons, we stayed in the vehicle. We didn't just get out and walk around. In some areas we were able to walk, but in the main game areas we didn't because of the potential danger from some of the animals. We had our guide that was the driver for our safari vehicle. Safari groups will have anywhere 4, 6, 8 people, and even larger depending on the group. With a normal group, they would stop and see some activity for a while, typically a fairly short period of time, and then move on and look for something else. So I just planned it just for the 2 of us. I wanted to be sure that we had adequate time to photograph the wildlife when we saw something really compelling. And as a photographer, I just really wanted the time to observe the wildlife and see their activity and photograph them from different perspectives and different lenses and emphasize the photography aspect of it. We saw waterbuck, rhinoceros, African buffalo, quite a variety of birds like the ground hornbill, African fish eagle, zebra, and lions. In Kenya, our safari vehicle was like a large Jeep with 2 rooftop hatches. We could stand up and photograph out of. We both had binoculars as well. And I would use a beanbag resting on the top of the safari vehicle to support my 200 to 400 telephoto lens with a Nikon D300 camera. And Amy just had a little point and shoot camera, but she was absolutely enthralled with seeing all the wildlife in their natural environment. In Samburu, we saw, I believe it was a Rothschild giraffe. Lake Nakuru, it was Maasai giraffe that we saw. Lions sleep most of the day, so sometimes you just have to hang around for a while to wait for anything to happen. Occasionally they would come up close to our vehicle. Our guide was very careful to not disturb the animals, so we would approach him at what he thought was a respectful distance, and then I'd photograph them with my telephoto lens. But occasionally the lions would actually approach our vehicle. I even saw one situation where 2 lions were laying in the shade of another group's safari vehicle, which was not what you would expect to see. So we saw the predator-prey relationship, and it's on full display. The lions, cheetahs, hyenas prey on quite a large variety of animals, but everything from the zebras and wildebeest to smaller animals like impala and gazelles and warthogs. There's quite a variety of other animals that are prey. It's really fascinating to watch that relationship. One scene we saw that was quite interesting was first we saw two lions on a dead zebra that they were eating. Close to that we saw the mate of that zebra that was an obviously great emotional distress. It was kind of pounding the ground with its hoofs and running back and forth. It was the mate of the one that had just been killed or recently been killed. And after a period of time, it just took off running away. And that was kind of sad, but that's part of the natural cycle there. Another interesting episode, we saw 3 cheetahs that were stalking a female topi, which is like a large deer, and its calf. They stalk it like a cat stalks a bird. They're very stealth, quiet, and once they get close enough, then they start running. The cheetah is the fastest land animal, so they can run very fast. We saw this one interaction where the cheetahs were attacking this adult topi, jumping up on its hindquarters, and the topi would kick and get it off, and that went on for a while, and then the topi got away. Then we caught up again with the cheetahs, and they were standing there kind of forlorn, and they were going to have to go another day without eating. Another major wildlife episode that happens in this part of Africa, we were in the Masai Mara region, which is the northern part of the Serengeti. The Masai Mara is in Kenya, the Serengeti is in Tanzania. But the wildebeest migrate from Serengeti in Tanzania north into Kenya, and they have to following the rains and the grasses because they eat grass. There's an incredible wildlife event that happens when the herds of wildebeest cross the Mara River, which I believe that's the border between Kenya and Tanzania. The wildebeest cross the river, large numbers of crocodiles there that just hide there in the water waiting for them to cross, and then they jump up and grab them. And there's so many wildebeest that only a few actually get killed, and the vast majority get across the river to safety. But there's quite a few that end up dying. We didn't see it. They weren't crossing the river when we were there. We actually did see quite a few carcasses of dead ones. So another thing that was really interesting to us was seeing the Maasai people. We visited one of their villages as we were out driving, looking for wildlife. We saw Maasai people with grazing cattle, and they're herding people, so they make their livelihood with cattle and goats. We visited a Maasai village that was really interesting. We had free reign of the village. The people were very friendly, and they allowed me to photograph them as much as I wanted. One of the ritual dances that they do is the men from a standing position jump up in the air, and they sing and they do other things, but it's absolutely extraordinary how high from a standing position they can jump. I was quite impressed with that. They showed us some of their lodges that the women actually build. It's a male-dominated society. There's a lot of things that are undesirable about it, but it's their culture that has gone on for thousands of years. The men are warriors, but there's no fighting to do now, so they kind of have the easy life while the women do most of the work. After going to the 3 different locations in Kenya, which again were Samburu, Lake Nakuru, and then the Masai Mara region, we flew from Nairobi to Arusha, Tanzania, and spent the rest of our trip in Tanzania. We started in an area called Senya, which is a wildlife refuge. Had nice views of Mount Kilimanjaro as we were driving to Senya. Senya is noted, among other things, for the large bull elephants that there's quite an abundance of. And one of the things we did that was interesting there was our guide took us to an open-air market in a very remote area that villagers from the surrounding area would come to, I think like one day a week. It was a major event. The people would go to this market and trade their goods and buy things. People were not very receptive to me photographing them there. However, our guide and the people that he knew allowed us to photograph them. But the other people that were there just, to buy stuff at the market were not really keen on me photographing them. One of the fascinating things that they demonstrated for us was starting a fire with wood and friction, which I'd never seen done before. That was pretty fascinating. And they showed us some of the crafts that they carve and that they sell to people like us to supplement their livelihood. One of the things we did that I really enjoyed was we went for an afternoon walk with a Maasai warrior. He was explaining a lot about the Maasai culture. It's just nice to be out and walking around. When we were in the area where there was a lot of wildlife, we were not safe to just get out and walk around, but in this area area was safe for us. It was just a pleasant walk and enjoy the scenery. And there was a hippo pond there that had lots of hippopotamus. And we saw a variety of monkeys and birds. I especially enjoyed the little bee eater bird, very colorful. We saw a monitor lizard. Another really unusual wildlife encounter we saw as we were driving Lake Manyara Reserve. There was a dead giraffe. Sitting in a tree next to it was a male lion. Our guy said that is the only time he'd ever seen giraffe that apparently was killed by a single lion. That was pretty fascinating. And it had just been freshly killed, he thought. The lion was in a tree sleeping, and we were in between the lion and the dead giraffe. And after a few minutes, the lion kind of woke up and opened his eyes and then kind of started snarling at us. So we decided we better get out of there because we were between the lion and his prey, and that's not a good place to be. Roads are pretty rough there. On the way back from the market, we got a flat tire in our safari vehicle, so that's to be expected out there, and there's no repair places close at hand. Fortunately, they always carry one or two spare tires. And then the last place we went to in Tanzania was the Ngorongoro crater. It's the largest unbroken caldera in the world. It's a volcano that blew up and has left a large ring around the perimeter of it, and then over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. The crater has filled in with just a lot of level ground, and there's actually a river in there and a lake, and very unique ecosystem. And there's some species that are indigenous to that environment because of the fact that there's like this 2,000 foot high rim of the crater around the floor of the crater. So the animals, many of them at least, are unique to that area. Grant's gazelles, ostrich, lots of the African buffalo, still zebra, and other animals. We saw a forest of baobab trees, which are quite an unusual tree. We stayed at a really beautiful lodge on the rim of the crater, but it's just another wonderful area to see wildlife in their natural environment and doing what they've done for millions of years. Lovely place to be at sunset and watch the sun go down, have a glass of wine, just enjoy the view.